I first got introduced to the IBF a year and a bit ago. It was through charity pointed it out, and I went to the IBF Best Practices Conference in Orlando. And that's where I met a lot of great people. I'd recommend, if you're interested in going to one of these events, definitely go see the event in Orlando. Really great discussion, and it's gotten me coming back. I've gone back to other subsequent events. I've been to chapter meetings, and I'm speaking to you now. So I think it's a really group of people, and why I kind of like giving this presentation to you today is because we're all of we face similar challenges. I like to say we're all equally masochistic in that we like to do forecasting because it's a really difficult job. So today, actually let me go, I didn't have the intro slide. Today I'm going to talk about assumptions. But I want to lead into assumptions from a position, this is sort of a slide from the midpoint of a deck that I've used before, but since you're all forecasters, I figure you'll be able to catch up to this point in the story pretty quick. We are sitting in an environment right now where we have tons of data, right? Raise your hand if you're a forecaster that has access to lots of data, right? Lots of data, right? Could be good data, could be bad data, but there's lots of data. I'm reminded regularly that we have a lot of methods to forecast with that data. Lots of methods that were invented 50, 100 years ago that we haven't even learned how to use yet, and we're just so ignorant for not using them. But there's just a lot of methods, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of capability to use advanced analytics in our business to better predict the future, right? When we normally look at sort of a workflow around this, or how should we tackle this problem, we typically see something like this, right? Where it says we've got to look at the data, segment my business according to what I can forecast, what I can't forecast. Some things are very predictable, some things are not very predictable, some things are really important to the business, other things are not. So let me find the things that are important and very predictable and put an analytics engine attached to that, and I'm going to drive a really good forecast out of that. And the stuff that's really not very forecastable because it's got a high coefficient of variation, what have you, maybe I'll deal with that manually. Has anybody ever heard that story? Yes, nodding around the room. Good. So I was right in assuming that I did not need to do a huge lead up to get to this point. Now, this is where I like to say, congratulations, you're like 10% of the way done. This is where I feel, and we've learned that getting the right answer, which is having an accurate forecast, is like it should be, like most of the work, right? But in practice, it's such a small sliver of the amount of work that you need to do. And I'll prove it to you. Have you ever been in forecast review, S&OP meeting, demand review, whatever you call it, and had your forecast that you firmly believe is accurate challenged by a sales leader or a marketing leader? Has it ever happened? Yes, it's nodding. Have you ever encountered that frustrating situation where that sales or marketing leader says, no, that can't be right. We need to do this in the forecast. This is what I've committed to. This is the number, right? Yes, right? This is where, if you're all nodding, you would agree that getting the right answer gets you slightly there, but getting people to believe you, convincing leadership that your answer is in fact the right answer, which you know it's got a lot of math and science and proof behind it, that's a whole lot of work. And then even if you did convince that leader that it was the right answer, getting to do something about it, because knowing the right answer and then doing anything about it are wildly different things. Now, if this is our reality, and we struggle with convincing leadership and the rest of the business to do something with the math that we do today, is adding more science going to make it easier or harder? Harder. Is it going to be more of a challenge with more data? Yes. Is this a problem that we should expect? I think yes. I think that this is a problem that's totally predictable because people that don't understand things are typically people fear that which they don't understand. So people have said, the more and more I talk about statistics with my senior leadership, the less they believe me. Right? There are people in this world that believe that it's flat, I think. At least I read that on the internet. That could be completely false, right? But is there somebody, like you've read about it, right? Like somewhere, flat earthers, people that believe the earth is flat. Okay, so there's people. Let's assume the hypothesis that somebody somewhere on this earth believes it's flat. We've known that the earth is not flat for, I don't know, 500 years, something like that. So if we've been working for 500 years to try to convince the population of this planet that it's a sphere, and we haven't succeeded yet, then don't feel bad about not having convinced or taught your VP of sales Aramax. Like, I just wouldn't feel bad about that, right? Like, I would be like, that's a big challenge compared to just at least getting everyone to agree that this planet is a sphere. So it's that which we don't understand or don't have a full grasp of that we tend to fear as part of human nature. So if that's the case and that's what we're up against, how do we deal with it? Now, I've learned that when you show things in quadrants, you look really smart. So I'm going to continue to show you things in quadrants. I suggest that when you look at your business, the typical graph of like volume or impact and forecastability is one way to look at it, but I like to look at it as, do I have an automated analytical approach, something I can do automated, like I can use my methods and my systems to do really well, or do I have a very manual approach, one that's like new item forecasting, that sort of thing, that's very difficult to do. And then business importance, that which the business doesn't care about very much, and that which the business does care about a lot. Not to be confused with business impact, because very often the business cares about stuff that has like no impact. You appreciate that. It's that thing that you're like, why do you care about this? It's like no revenue impact at all. Like in our business, it's usually this emerging or perceived to be emerging channel that's going to revolutionize the business, and at the current moment it's insignificant, but there's a lot of focus on it, like e-commerce or something like that, let's just say, hypothetically. Hypothetically, it's just the most important thing. If I have something that can be very well automated from a forecasting perspective, and nobody cares about it, then I can do whatever I want. I'm going to put it on autopilot, that's perfect, everyone's happy, right? I'll just let APO, SAS, whatever tool I have, just do it. Nobody's going to check it. They don't care that it's a black box, because it doesn't matter to anybody, and everyone's happy. If it is very difficult to forecast, right, it requires manual work, and it's really important to the business, then I'm going to put my top talent on that. And everyone's going to kind of be like, that makes sense, right? I got my best forecaster on it, it's really hard, and everyone's paying attention to it, and you won't get into a lot of trouble with this. You really won't, because you've got your best people on it, and you're working really hard. And it's hard to work on, and you're going to be engaging with the business, and not too much room for mistakes there. Well, there's room for mistakes, but it'll be aligned. You run into problems when you've got something that's not very important to the business, but it takes you a lot of effort to forecast. Everyone has this desk. It's the desk that you get no Christmas card for. We have some parts of our business that are very difficult to forecast. They're very binary. You have an entire person who I'm looking at right now who has to forecast that, and it's just very challenging. You have to invest a lot of resources in it, and the business importance doesn't equate to the level of effort you put into it, and I say we have to contract with the business on expectations and manage those expectations. Now, the part of the mix, or the part on this quadrant that I think we run into problems with, is this part of the business that's really important to people, but there's an opportunity, analytically, you could like forecast this mathematically with like very high predictability, right? Like it's the part of your business, maybe it's like a cookie that we've been selling for 100 years that is circular and has chocolate wafers and cream in the middle of it. And it's very predictable, and you could totally put it on a stat forecast and get a really good accuracy with it. But it's so important to the business that nobody can just let you just use a black box. And this is where people get frustrated. Because you walk into the room, you know you've got a forecast that's highly accurate. Like there's 100 years of history, and you just know the answer, and then you struggle because you're speaking a different language. And this is what I want to talk about a little bit more. This area is where I think that we run into challenges because we have this gap or this void to bridge between analytical capability that we have tons of and the business culture that we're faced with, the people that run the business. who aren't fluent in that analytical capability. So, your company probably has somebody in sales, somebody in marketing. Maybe more than one person in sales and more than one person in marketing. But let's say that the sales and marketing people are in your demand review, hypothetically. Sales guy's got the tie on, that's how you know he's in sales. Now, this is a consensus meeting. This is a hypothetical consensus discussion. The sales guy says, I can sell $10 million worth of stuff. Right? The marketing guy goes, totally agree, 10 million, that's the number. I'm with you. We have consensus, right? Consensus, they agree. 10 million each. What could possibly go wrong, right? Let's take the rest of the day off. They're happy. We've succeeded in our consensus meeting. There's an aligned sales and marketing number of $10 million. This is Shangri-La, right? Everyone's happy. Except the sales guy's like, half of this is your job. It's going to be the innovation that we're launching. It's going to totally carry me. The other half I have to do with trade promotions. And the marketing guy's like, my innovation's not doing very much. I hope you know that. And I need you to make up $8 million on trade promotions. So it's the classic line, right? It's not the numbers, it's the assumptions that matter. So you're like, okay, I've heard this a million times, Greg. Assumptions are important. Yeah, they're critically important because things go horribly wrong if we don't know what the assumptions are behind the plan. Okay, so assumptions are important. Assumptions are important for a couple of reasons. One is to make sure that we're talking about a plan, not a forecast. Does anybody here know the difference between a plan and a forecast? Many of your leaders do not know the difference between a plan and a forecast. I define a plan as something you go and do. It is a set of instructions or a set of things I'm going to go and do to make something happen. A forecast is just what might result. And in this case, the forecast is the same, the plan is very, very different. We have attempted and succeeded at implementing some things that help us bridge that gap. Now, is this familiar? Look at that. Has anybody seen anything like that before? Look familiar? It's the SAP. It comes right out of the SAP Sales and Operations Planning tool. I know there's at least one person in this room that's spent, or multiple people in this room that have looking away, that has spent a lot of time in the SAP S&OP tool. So some of you have seen something like this, right? It's got sales forecast, marketing forecast, demand planning forecast, consensus forecast. Right? That's the tool. That's what we've got. What's missing? There are no words. There's no words on there. There's no plan. This is what we've been given as forecasters or as IVP practitioners to work with, is tools that rack up numbers and have no place for words. They have no place for a plan. They have only a place for us to say, are we both agreeing to $10 million? But no semblance of have we agreed on how we're going to get to $10 million? And are we agreeing on the same things that each other is going to do in order to make that $10 million happen? Right? It's completely lost. It's invisible. You can't see it. And that's a problem. So, we've got workarounds, right? So we started, I don't know, years ago. When in my past life and in my current life, we've used workarounds. We've got pages that we put in our demand review decks or documents that we keep beside our forecasts that outline our key planning assumptions. Does anybody else do that? You have hopefully something that says maybe sales is going to go and do this and marketing is going to do this and the new products are going to be available at this time, and you have an assembly of Word documents or PowerPoint slides, and you maybe store them together close to the forecast, and you try to work that way, right? We do the same thing, so don't feel alone if that's what you do. It's great for communicating, it's great for presenting, but we felt years ago that there was an opportunity to further entrench this, to build this closer to the forecast. So where did we start? And this is where I start to link something that we've done here, I think very pretty successfully, with the problem that I started with at the beginning, and where I said that if you want to be successful in your consensus reviews and your consensus meetings, the rule of those meetings, especially with senior leaders, is the best storyteller wins. The best storyteller wins. The person who can sell their view of what's going to happen better than the others in the room, with conviction, with facts and data, but sell the story and explain it in a way using the language that your executives understand, will win. They will have the credibility because leadership speaks that language. It's just the fundamental truth. They don't speak ARIMA models. They speak innovation. Our leaders speak innovation, advertising, inventory, price. Those are the words that our sales leaders, that our marketing leaders, that our business leaders use when they're talking about the business. So we listened, shockingly, to the way our leaders speak and the way they speak about the business and the way they like to describe a forecast, the way they would go to the board of directors, right? The way our CEO would go to the board and say, I'm confident that I'm going to hit this number next year. I'm going to do it by increasing my advertising spend. I'm going to launch these new innovations, and I'm going to reduce trade spending, and this is how I'm going to get to the number next year. So we recognized and listened to that and said, okay, if that's the language that's being spoken, then that's the language that we need to entrench into the way we communicate our plans. Is everyone following on so far? I haven't lost you? You're all kind of like, okay, kind of see this. This is the language that worked for us. It doesn't necessarily work for everyone else. Like if you're a software company, these are not necessarily going to work. If you're in a BlackBerry, a tech company, which doesn't sell hardware anymore, but it's a separate story I can talk about. But like these words wouldn't have worked at BlackBerry. Like it would have been a very different conversation about how we're going to destroy Apple and stuff like that. But it would have been just a different set of business drivers, right? It's what suits your business, but we had to identify what are the business drivers, what is the common language that we're going to use as a business to talk about our growth plans. We then built them into our documents. Like we basically trained, we got leadership buy-in that anywhere you're going to see a forecast, and I'll preface this right now by saying this is not easy, nor is it like a one-off change. It's a continuous change. You have to continuously drive this into your business and your organization. But we succeeded in getting people trained and accustomed at a leadership level to expect that when I'm being shown a forecast, I don't want to be shown a number. I want to be shown a bridge. And anytime I see a forecast, I don't want to just see, here's the number. I'm going to expect to say, where is the bridge? Using these definitions. Like this is what we trained them to look for. And it's really simple. It's arguably more complicated than it needed to be, but we started with what is our prior year, and then what change versus year ago are we expecting to see happen according to those different business drivers that we defined, the language that our leadership team speaks. So if I'm presenting a forecast, I can say, I'm going to grow, and this is, by the way, all made up numbers from years ago, but let's say I've got a plan to go to 4.1% growth. I can see it's mostly innovation driven, offset by distribution. So I'm going to launch some innovation, some new SKUs, but then I'm probably going to have to make room for it on the shelf by taking and discontinuing some old slower ones. And so that's what my plan is made up of. I've got some advertising spend that's going to go up, and this is the plan. It seems simple, but it was powerful for a number of reasons. One, those drivers are more or less aligned to functional responsibilities or accountabilities, right? Somebody owns those building blocks in the business, like the delivery of that. There's a person who's responsible for innovation. And by glancing at that, they can kind of learn to say, oh, geez, are they calling up the forecast on my piece? Like, is it innovation that's going up? Or if the sales leader is really responsible for trade, like, oh, are they counting on me delivering $4 million of revenue next year because of trade efficiencies? If I'm the marketing person, is it advertising that's supposed to drive the volume? Like people see their piece of accountability behind the plan on the page. And it creates one step better than just a number that nobody has any idea what the assumptions are, to exposing, not in a gory amount of detail, because behind the scenes, obviously, there would be many, many more assumptions. But just that one step better than nothing was a huge improvement in terms of people understanding what the assumptions were in the plan that they're looking at, or what assumptions changed. Because again, if I'm looking at this to explain my forecast today, as we all know, you always have a plan until you choose to change it. So therefore, next month when I go into my consensus meeting, I'm going to be talking about the changes to the forecast according to these drivers. It almost sometimes becomes less important about what the absolutes were, but more about where is it changing. You know, so this month there's new news. Oh, I see a change on distribution. What's going on? Have we lost something? Has a customer delisted us? Have we got a new listing? Are there, you know, whatever it is. Have I got a new SKU going in? But it helps center and guide the discussion, but anchoring the assumptions to the forecast. Make sense? It seems like a simple thing. Not easy to accomplish, but tremendously valuable in changing the conversation in our demand meetings from sort of like voodoo, which nobody wants to talk about, which is statistical modeling, right? That sort of art that, yes, you need it in order to be confident that this has credibility behind it, but when you get to your senior leadership team, it doesn't get you very far, but also combines that ability to see functional accountability to the plan to say, do the people know what they need to go and do in order for this to become reality? Now, I'll take you one step deeper. We sort of stole from accountants. So as you saw, I kind of got an accounting background. So when I saw this, I didn't invent this. I won't take full credit for it. But when I saw it, I totally stole it and implemented it across the board here, because I think it's a really smart way of doing it. We don't forecast our business this way, but we communicate our forecasts in basically a general ledger. And so if anybody has any accounting experience, it's like a general ledger. It's a journal, right? It's a journal of what changed. And we track every month, like as you see down the left-hand side, we have a plan version. This is an Excel spreadsheet. It's not so fancy and expensive. But it's just a journal of what changed this month. And those what changed this month, the what changed are your assumptions. The description column there is the most important thing we fill in. And it's my thought process of, oh, I'm taking the call down, or the forecast down this month by $60 gazillion, and I'm putting to the right the impact that I've recorded, the $60 gazillion change, and I'm going to just write in words, why am I making the change? I'm going to categorize that assumption, and my team's joking because they do a great job of writing these words all the time. It's an awesome debate over who writes the best descriptions. I personally love auditing it. But we write the descriptions more for the planner's own benefit, and then we categorize it, right? We categorize the assumption bucket that this sits in, right? So we pick from a drop-down, is this one of those 10 business drivers? If you do that, then it becomes easy to just sort of like roll it all up. We just roll this all up, and that allows me to get to that total top level, what is the forecast by key planning assumption. Now, when we first rolled this out, some of you might think, geez, Greg, that looks cool, but now I got to ask my forecasters to fill in another Excel spreadsheet, and they already want to murder me, so like really, I don't want to give them more reason to want to do that. Now, that was my fear as well. I had come into the business and I was like, I'm going to ask these, do I really want to force more work? But it's not more work, because the same people that I asked to fill this in were already being asked, what's changed? What are the assumptions? What's going on? Give me a bridge of what changed from last month to this month. I'm going into a meeting with senior leader XYZ. I need you to give me a bridge of why did we go from 3% growth to 9% growth on this? Or why did we change from 3 months ago? Why 3 months ago, I remember you said we were at 8% and now we're at 2%. Tell me why from 3 months ago to now I've changed. Help me bridge that, because I need to go and explain it to Joe Smith, who is asking me this. The teams were fundamentally being asked this all the time. And unwittingly, by creating a little simple tool for this, it helped them. It helped them with all of those ad hoc requests that they were getting anyways. So while it is extra to doing the forecast, you still need to have your models and all that sort of stuff behind the scenes. It helped them explain the changes they were making. I'll keep going with this thought, is that it helped force people to think about the changes they were making to the forecast in the language that the executives are using. So I bridge that. Now I'm taking the language that my CFO speaks, and I'm teaching it to my demand planner on a small brand, or all my brands, or all parts of my business. So that person now, when they've racked up their forecast, they have to think about the story that has to be told, ultimately, all the way up the chain. And if they can't tell that story, if they can't in words explain it to a leadership person, like anybody in leadership, then it's not going to pass. It's not going to make it through the demand review. It's not going to pass the sniff test. So better to force the rigor of planning for the questions that are going to be asked, or planning the story as part of the forecasting process, rather than it being a frustration at the end of the forecasting process when you're sitting in the executive review and struggling to explain something, when you're saying, yeah, but the ARIMA model says, but like, nah, I don't care. If you're able to speak in their language bottoms up, you're building capability, you're getting people to think net change, and you're also getting people, what I like to use this for, and I say this a lot to my team, is to say, if you can't explain the forecast change, then don't change the forecast. Like if you can't explain it, if your model is spitting something out that you don't understand, don't just feed that not understood thing down the chain. Stop it, and you have to understand it before you can put it into this format and explain it then up the chain to leadership. So it creates a quality control process in the forecasting stages. So things that are difficult to explain, you spend the time on, really questioning it. The things that are easy, they happen simply. Does that make sense? Lots of benefit from a simple thing that we added on, not really added on, but structured outside of the forecasting process, or outside of the forecasting tool set. Now, I've asked this and looked for this a lot. I think there probably are tools out there that allow you to track assumptions in words. I haven't, I know SAP doesn't let me do it, so I don't have it in SAP. I don't even have SAP right now in the forecasting role that I've got right now, so I don't even have that option. But just the simple concept of forcing the discipline around journalizing your assumption changes every month was massively helpful for us. There's another dimension, actually, Nish was asking about onboarding new people and new talent, and bringing people into your organization. As many forecasting teams will experience, if you've got a team of people that are strong, high potential, and they have exposure to the rest of the business, they tend to be able to move, and so you have this challenge of bringing on new people into the team. And the biggest learning curve to somebody coming into a forecasting desk is understanding the existing plan. And the best transitions we've had are where there was a really good journal of all the forecast changes. There was the history, they could replay the tape, right? They could go back over the last 6 months of forecast changes and follow the story. Now, the team's also giggling because there's examples of where if it's not really well written, it's a challenge. But the best examples of onboarding are where those assumptions are clearly documented. And we've seen it time and time again that when you bring somebody new in, even if they don't read and memorize it all, they can look it up. Oh, why did this change? They can look up and see the words and see the story. And what's written in here doesn't have to be written for board level discussion, but it has to be written well enough that somebody could come back to it and look at it and see it and understand what it meant. Everyone's tracking? Makes sense? Okay. Where am I on time? I am not doing too badly. We did, to get this entrenched, a number of different things, and we continue to do these things. So first thing was you had to do a bunch of hands-on training. So this is at the initial stages of rolling this out. We ran Building Block Boot Camp, as we called it at the time. We did a lot of training and education in the early stages. It is not trivial to sort of just make up these business drivers or discuss or sort of select the language that the executive team is speaking and then be able to have everyone translate their planning assumptions into those buckets consistently. It's an art as much as it is a science. So it required a lot of training and education and hands-on work with the team. We did continuous engagement. We would continue to challenge people and ask questions and work with teams. We had strong executive sponsorship for it. That's obviously super critical because we had to teach the leadership team to expect to see those forecasts expressed using business drivers. And even today, we still have to continuously reinforce that because leadership changes, people come and go, and you have to continue to reinforce that. And education sessions. So we would teach people outside of the forecasting function what those different business drivers meant, what those building blocks are. And I would say 3 years ago when I joined the company in Canada, we were rolling this out. And 3 years later, which is almost an eternity in the amount of change in forecasting churn that's happened, we're still using those 10 building blocks. It's still entrenched in our process. If I look at my category MBR decks, the building blocks are in there. My team uses them all the time. They're still very much part of our process. And it's because we haven't let off. Like we understand it's part of our, like after sticking with this long enough, it becomes part of the DNA. And like I said before, if it's an easier way for people to keep track of their planning assumptions, they'll just do it sort of naturally. They'll find that it just makes their life easier. And then it makes our lives easier to explain and communicate with leadership. In terms of what it did for us, now this is a little bit dated, I probably need to update these, but we did see 50% improvement in demand plan error over the 2 years, so a couple of years ago we did see this improvement. Greater functional accountability, each owner sees their piece of the plan. Like I said, sales sees on the page, oh, that's trade, that's mine, so therefore if I see the number in that bucket changing wildly, I'll be more apt to speak up and talk about why I may or may not agree with that. So you get better engagement from different stakeholders in the process. Better transparency to the planning assumptions at any step of the process. Very often we catch things, we look at it and say, why is there a bunch sitting in other? What is in the other? Why is it there? Or does it make sense? We challenge things that look odd. We catch mistakes more frequently. And then from the team, they're able to answer questions from leadership more quickly, right? They're able to get to the answer of what changed, why did it change, what is the assumption? Because facts are friendly, right? Just sharing, this is what the assumption is. We can have a debate about the assumption, but at least we're talking about the assumption, not about the number. I'm happy in every forecast meeting to debate the assumptions, as long as then subsequently, once we've landed on an assumption, then we're going to talk about the number, not the other way around. Less work between months, because we're talking about specific assumption changes. We're not regenerating the entire thing. And empowers the planners to communicate to leadership. It brings that language that the leadership team uses into the planner's vocabulary and into their thought process as they're forecasting, which I think is just a hugely important business skill for that team. So we've been doing this, as I said, for 3 years now. We're still using Excel spreadsheets to do it because it's really not that sophisticated a thing. It's really the discipline and the process around it that's important. It's helped us with the accountability. It's helped us with the, not just the accountability, but also our ability to bring advanced analytics. As I loop back to where I started from the analytics perspective, there's just so much more opportunity for us, I would say, in terms of being able to bring analytics with the amount of data that we have to the table. This bridge, this lets me ensure that whatever I supercharge or invest in from an analytical capability, I'm not going to lose that value when I'm trying to interface with the leadership team. I'm going to be able to preserve the integrity of what that brings me, that getting that 10% of the effort of getting the right answer. I can continue to invest in getting a more right answer that then I can bring effectively into a consensus discussion with senior leaders in the company without them tuning out when I start talking about why I've just got the latest and greatest AI forecasting. If I said I was using AI to forecast, I think I would probably have a Terminator 2 reference made and my forecast thrown out. You know what I mean? It would be like, but if I'm able to speak about it in terms of those business drivers, there's a whole lot more credibility in the conversation. Things we learned, keep it simple to start. So I'll tell you things that we did wrong. We picked too many business drivers. I would argue we have 10, we probably could have used 5. We made it a little too complicated, but once we set those 10, they're so set, they're not changing. We haven't gone back and tried to change it. I implore people to think about keeping it simple. That's an area, because if you try to make it way too sophisticated, it will fail because nobody will understand it. And really, when you're talking about leadership communication, the simpler the message is, the better. Assumption tracking is complementary. It's not a replacement for forecast. This is not how we forecast, it's how we communicate our forecasts. We don't want to let analytics get in the way of the assumptions. That's when I said it before. If a model is spitting something out that I can't explain, I don't want to let that get in the way. I want to always be going back to the assumptions. And I will happily defer a forecast change to give my team enough time to be able to properly explain it, rather than getting it in right away. Like if some model spits out that we need to make a change to the forecast that I can't explain well, I will wait to be able to explain it well rather than get it in sooner but have a weaker explanation for it or justification for it, because it'll just end up getting killed and I'll have lost my opportunity to sell it or to communicate it. You really kind of get one shot with new information to be able to communicate it well. And then last point, which is supporting with an active and engaged quality process. So we have to look at it, I have to audit it, I have to bug my team and drive them crazy, looking at the building blocks and how they've classified things and debate it and continue to audit it. We said on an ongoing basis. But if you do that, then it's like they say, garbage in, garbage out. You put quality information into those building blocks, you'll have a continuously well-maintained forecast. Questions? I know I've talked a lot, probably too much. I know I think there's a mic. Yeah, any questions for folks? We've got some. Sorry?
At a high item network level.
So the question was, at what level were we doing this? And she was saying item network or item location. This is not at item. This is, we do this at like brand, like this, or category, gum. This is like chewing gum. Like it is not at a like tried, and strident, stride, bottles, I don't know, some like, no, it's very aggregate. Again, that detail happens. This exercise is for my portfolio planner. So a planner on my team owns the entire category and is doing more top-down planning. And it's for communicating those aggregate planning assumptions that I would then bring to a VP of sales, a VP of marketing, CFO, that sort of level. So we're doing this at the level. You could do it at a SKU level. That's just not how we've implemented it. I don't know if that I would. The one exception, or a little asterisk, is on innovation. We're at a granular detail on innovation, but this isn't replacing other models that we would have for innovation forecasting. In fact, this has very little in it on innovation because there's so many other supplemental documents that we have for innovation forecasting that have like distribution builds and velocities and like products and like your proxy items and all that sort of stuff. That's where we keep all of that detail, and in here we actually simplify it and just say latest innovation forecast. Helpful? No, we've got one there and then one here.
I'm curious on how you validate assumptions that aren't directly tied to demand planning. Like, let's say marketing comes to you and they say, we're going to invest $2 million in media and we're expecting a $3 million lift. Mm-hmm. So without just taking those assumptions as facts, like how do you suggest on validating assumptions such as that?
You wouldn't just take it as fact? Like with the marketing, you wouldn't? That's weird. Yeah.
Basically, how do you manage bias?
Yeah. So
you having that bridge discussion that.
Absolutely. So there's a couple things. One is, so there's forward-looking and backwards-looking to your question. So if I expect the marketing person to come to me with an assumption, I'm going to go and spend X dollars and I'm going to do this promotion. That's a good, healthy discussion. I don't expect them to own calculating the lift impact. And that's sort of where we need to come to the table with our models, and we have various different models that we might use to calculate what the return on a spend might be. So we have marketing mix models, there might be trade models, there's other models, analytical models that support this. This tool, this isn't where we would do the calculations of what the lift would be, but this is where we would record the assumption. So, and there's two dimensions to that. I often say, I spend more time forecasting what my organization is going to do than forecasting what a consumer is going to do. Because it's like, model error versus assumption error, and model error is always really low and assumption error is always really large because it's the assumptions that matter. So the first I may have just a healthy level of skepticism and experience in the team to challenge whether or not, if they say they're going to spend $2 million of advertising, do I really believe them? But it's as important to be in a consensus meeting. If I have that visible, that marketing spend is what's driving the uplift, and it's on the page, then at least it's visible to the finance person who's in the room and saying, I never allocated budget to you to spend that much money, or the salesperson or other people in the room. I make it a consensus discussion around, do we all agree that marketing is going to spend $2 million and get this lift? And if everyone agrees to the plan, then we have an agreed plan. That's better than a not agreed plan. Now, in terms of after the fact actualizing it, like saying, did it actually happen? That's one area where I would say you have to really be thoughtful about how you categorize those business drivers. If I go back to my picture here, some of these things overlap, which is a thing we learned probably the hard way. There's difficulty in discreetly saying the consumer buy this because of X, Y, or Z. So we have some models that allow us to actualize, some models that don't. Again, that comes down to some amount of judgment from a planner and other analytical models that they might have. At the end of the day, though, the way we categorize it here has to resonate with the leadership team. So I may be inclined to actualize the forecast or bucket it, again, in a way that the leadership team believes it to be materializing. I don't know if that helps. It makes it more or less confusing, but that is an influence on it, right? So, and then in terms of bias, again, by forecasting and actualizing the different planning assumptions, I can see which assumptions have bias. I can narrow my bias down from just total level bias. I can say, hey, I have bias on trade, because I have or bias on innovation, which we all probably can calculate that anyways, but I might have bias on my distribution. And distribution is very easy to actualize because we get Nielsen scanner data, and I can actually go in and see, am I growing or losing distribution? And I can say, hey, you know what, we always overcall distribution. And that's a source of bias, and I can fix the distribution. It helps me narrow the scope of things I'm looking at to squash or eliminate bias from my forecast. And that's a huge benefit that we have. Eliminating bias is about just eliminating places to look for the bias, and then getting down to those key assumptions that have the bias in them. So hopefully that answers the question there. Question in the back.
So I'm curious as to what tool you use, if you use a tool. I don't know, I heard Excel, I don't know if that's what that is. And then, so what tool do you use, and then how do you manage uplift? So my experience is like, we had a tool, we would produce baseline, it was sales responsibility to enter uplift, and we would validate that, right? And then in the consensus meeting, we would kind of do that global cross-check to make sure that everybody was okay with it. So how do you do that? Tool and uplift, how do you manage
Tool and uplift. Tool is Excel. It's Excel. In our business, in our broader business, we have SAP, we use APO, but my team we sit in marketing. We're not even in supply chain or anything. We're sitting in the marketing, and we do forecasting at a very aggregate level. We have to forecast not just what Mondelez is going to do, we forecast what our competitors are going to do, what the category is going to do, we forecast all those things. So we're very aggregate right now in terms of our forecasting. We do things at a high level. We're literally living in Excel spreadsheets. Should be no surprise to people. Most used forecasting tool on the planet. We are investigating tools right now. So absolutely I'm shopping. I need tools to support. So the answer is sort of like, I have not what I want, but I'm looking. On the uplift question, we use a lot of history, right? Like historical calculations. So, I mean, we have a lot of examples. Like, there's not a lot of new ways to promote cookies and crackers. I mean, I'm sure there are in terms of new channels, but there's a lot of just good data. Like if I've got something on rollback at Walmart, I've done that before. So I can look at the historical data, and the people on my team, they look at historicals and say, well, the last 800 times you've done this, it did this lift. Here's the parameters that I might use for the future expectations of that. But that even goes outside my team. That sits within the sales team. There's a trade management team. There's other groups that also have access to that data. We tend to debate lift, but we have a lot of data to support where we land. So we tend to be able to sort of cut through that with data. If we support those calculations with the right data and articulated the right way, sold the right way with the right story around it, we tend to be able to combat bias on those lift assumptions. So if I went and said, here's the stat model that explains lift, I probably don't get too far. I typically have to explain it using the language that the sales team would understand.
Thanks. I just have a question. I don't know if you answered this before, but the numbers you're using, is that consumption or is that shipment? The first, actually all of them, but
all of them?
The starting line.
It's a really good question. On this bridge, this is revenue dollars, because that's the language that our sales team's speaking, right? So I can speak the same language as
basically
my sales team.
Shipment then.
Shipment. Right. But behind the scenes, some of these things are clearly consumption driven, and other ones are clearly like shipment inventory driven, and some are unfortunately a blend, like innovation, because it's going to have some pipeline and some consumption. Behind the scenes in our models, there's actually some sub lines in some cases where we differentiated between consumption and shipments, so that we can have that separation. That's actually something that was not contemplated well enough when we initially rolled this out. It was sort of a, let's start simple, right? Which was talk revenue building blocks that we could speak at a senior level. An area that I would have, if I was doing this over, I would have clearly differentiated consumption business drivers or building blocks, and then the bridge between consumption and shipments, which would be your trade inventory level changes. You know, in hindsight, I would have done that a little differently, but we do it today in behind the scenes with this. Any other questions? No? Going once? Manish? Oh, there was one over there, but you can fight over it.
Oh, I just had one. Does this information, it's very interesting, does it help you with recalls in any way? Because you're capturing, I mean, obviously like the SKUs and the things, but from a gathering information standpoint and then finding out where the products are.
I don't know, not in that space, no, because this isn't really connected to the level of data that I would need. Like again, when you get into like actual deployment of product and tracking of lots and things like that, it's a totally separate beast versus what we would use this for. So
rollouts of like new brands and things.
Yeah, so that's outside the scope of what I have to, luckily. That's one thing I actually am not accountable. I'm maybe the only thing I'm not really asked to do, so it's good. But yeah, it doesn't really.
Thanks, Craig. The journey that you were talking about of having this discussion about assumptions, was that at Mondelez or was that in your previous role? Because I'd like to know if you were able to see report some of the financial benefits that you saw from getting to this point, sort of a before and after.
So, as we said, from a forecast error perspective, we were on a progression of improving our forecast error, and have seen that benefit from this. It's the forecast error. It's not directly linked to this, except for the fact that you could say, I now have a better way of bringing my intelligence into the conversation and having more wins at the table, right? Like having less. We talk about forecast value add. Anybody here talks about, seen forecast value add and the build up, and they typically see these things like stat model is the best thing, and then every human interaction with your forecast just reduces the error, and the biggest one is the senior level people just like writing over it with a giant marker and just obliterating my forecast accuracy. It can help with that, right? Because it can help expose the good knowledge and analytics that I have to that senior level and minimize those adjustments, right? You want to kind of go in with an argument that you can win, or win the battle before you even get to the battle. So it better arms you to eliminate those overrides that maybe have negative forecast value add. In my previous life outside of Mondelez, I was kind of in this space, I would say. Where when we would have a forecast known as a BlackBerry, you'd have your forecast, but then your assumptions were kind of bolted onto it. I would have loved to have. I actually spent a lot of time on an assumption tracking project that we just couldn't get off the ground because it was way too complicated. We tried to like everything in a tech company, we tried to overcomplicate everything because we had gazillions of dollars at the time, and we thought we could just do it. We went way too far on the complexity level, and it never worked. This is the simplest thing, and the simple thing always worked, right? That's why we're coming to Mondelez and finding this journal. It was the right blend of a little bit more sophisticated, but not too complicated, like just rows in a spreadsheet. So I found that's what took it one step further, and I haven't let go of it since. And I think I'm very happy with it. I think that's why the double entry accounting system has been around for 500 years, something like that. Like from it was invented in Italy. Like it hasn't gone away because it works. So I think it was simple enough.